Welcome to the Bonsai Stuff podcast. I'm Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu. Spring is such a nice time of the year. Sun's shining, birds are chirping and nesting, flowers are popping, buds are sprouting, and it's coming to the end of the repotting season, which, when it gets this time of the year, all I can say is thank God. It's been another long season. I tell you, it's officially the main repotting season. I do have a second repotting season, which is for my natives, which comes in a few months' time as they start to wake up and become a bit more aggressive. But the main repotting season for me, as I've mentioned in the last couple of weeks, it's officially drawing to a close, which is great. So when this podcast comes out, I've had my last repotting class, last workshop with officially repotting. There'll be a few little tidbits here and there to get done, but pretty much it's all done. So I wanted to just talk a couple of things that relate to repotting time, I suppose, things that are really important to me when it comes to my work that I do. And one is to wrap up on Nebari work. So that's working on the lower base of the tree, the Nebari, and how it's so important at this time of the year to make sure that you get it right, and things that you need to do to make sure that next time when you repot somewhere down the track, you can see a massive change or a quantum leap forward. So hopefully it's not too late for you when you listen to it, but it's nice to look back and refresh upon these things, and hopefully you can have a few moments where you go, oh, that's right, well, I saw that change when I did my repotting of such and such a tree. The other is I want to talk about making large cuts. This applies to everything, but it relates to an issue I had the other day, repotting a radiata, which if you've looked at social media, you would have seen how I had to get the reciprocating saw out to cut this damn thing out of the pot. It was so wedged in there. But it made me think about how do you make large cuts and work out where your finish point is. So I want to talk about that. And as we head out of the dark dormancy of winter, the cold, gloomy times into this beautiful sunshine, knowing what comes after spring, that hot period, it's time to start talking a little bit about watering systems and automated watering systems in specific, because it's one of those things that I find is a backbone to what I do. Not always the case for everybody, and I just want to give you my 2 cents worth on that. So without any further ado, let's get into it. When I think about bonsai and what I'm really attracted to and what I love, it starts with the Nebari, so the base of the tree, where it spreads up into a beautiful trunk. And it doesn't need to be, sometimes you see those photos where the Nebari is like a plate and you've got a little stick coming up out of the middle of it, which is the trunk, which is a real dedicated skill to get to that point. I like a Nebari that looks really firm. When you see a grand tree in a park or bush setting or whatever it is, and you see it, and it looks like it's firmly rooted into the ground and it's got a big base spread to it. It could be a street tree. I know I've walked past them in the city, and you go past some of these beautiful street trees that are around the place, and they've got that beautiful spread across the Nebari. And it's like, wow, that's fantastic. Obviously because they've got limits on what's growing underneath them or what's available to grow down. Their natural spread, because they won't have had their taproot cut or any root work done on these things like we can do with bonsai. But because there's possibly something quite firm under there, and those roots are forced to spread to laterally, to the sides, the trunk then naturally draws out to that area as well, and you get this big spread over a very long period of time that looks amazing. And that's one of the most important parts, or the most attractive parts for me, that I work so hard on with my trees. Every time, if it's a tiny little thing that's started life as a cutting, then you get those roots, and whenever I do the root work on them, the basics are remove the downward growing roots, encourage and rake out the lateral roots. So anything spreading from the base of the trunk out and around, you keep those ones and you cut the downward stuff. So when it comes to the more mature trees, and you think about this, right? So your Nebari, you can only work on every 2 to 4 years. Everything else on that tree, on your bonsai, you can work on far more regularly, far more consistently. You can prune the apex every day of the week if you like. You can run sacrifice branches for the trunk. But when it comes to the Nebari itself, and that undersoil work, really you shouldn't be doing it for an older tree every year. So really it's every 2 years sort of minimum, and it spreads out further and further to sort of 3-4 years as they get older and older. So obviously start with removing the downward stuff, the lateral root spread, as I said. The other ones that I really work towards are, if you look at the tree from the top down. So if you look at the surface roots on that tree, there's the big underneath part which creates the spread and that trunk draw out for the base of the tree, for the lower trunk. But the crossing roots that sit at top are one of the main things when I take a tree out to repot, I'll look to remove. And I'll study those roots and look at them and go, where do you go? Where do you head? Is it worth keeping it? But I find that a lot of those crossing roots, or roots that are growing in the wrong direction, or roots that are on top of other roots, are ones that you can just simply remove. If you've had that tree in a bonsai good mix, whatever that is, that's up to you. But if you've had it in a good mix and you've got lots of fine fibrous roots that are ready to take up the water and nutrients, then removal of 1 or 2 roots here or there, even though at the time it might seem like it's significant, it's really not going to be. And I find that as you sort of lower that soil level down further and further, year on year on year, every repot, and it starts to drop down further down the trunk, you find that the base, or the Nebari, starts to get exposed a little bit more and starts to get wider and wider and wider. And it's those roots that are growing up higher up the trunk, or on top of the roots that are below, forming this beautiful Nebari, that you need to make sure you remove. So you want to keep fine roots growing around the very periphery of the edge of the Nebari, but those fine roots that are growing back in closer to the trunk, that there seems to be a real hesitation to remove, I look to cut them out. I look to remove them. So then the tree starts pushing or drawing resources from further away, which then helps magnify that spread, that base root spread that you've got as well. So taking the crossing roots, taking the roots that are growing in wrong direction, not trying to find a way where I can keep them, but looking at what the impact's going to be when I remove them. That's my mindset. It's different. So, but the preface to this, or the little asterisk in the corner that says, T's and C's apply, is that you've got to have a really strong root system. And I find that with my trees, as they get older, like let's say they've been through 2 or 3 cycles of repotting, so it's 6 years in the collection thereabouts, then I can start making more and more aggressive, I'm hesitant saying the word aggressive, but more and more definitive decisions, and being able to remove these finer roots that are back further, removing the roots that are crossing, removing the roots that are growing the wrong way, because it's like, if I'd done it 6 years ago when I first got the tree, or first repotted it and first saw these issues, I'd look at it and go, removal of that one root is going to result in me losing 10% of the root ball, and I can't afford to do that. The tree's not in strong enough condition. So therefore I'd keep it, I'd remove what I could underneath, try and start the work rolling, cover it back up, repot it. 2 years down the track, pull it out, have a look and go, okay, removing that root ball, what's it going to be? It's probably 5%, 6% of the root ball. It's probably still too significant. But then as it gets further and further down the line, you look at it and go, well, really, it's probably 1% of the root ball, if that I'm going to be removing by taking off that root that's growing the wrong way. So you don't need to rush into these things, make it look like a plucked chook, cutting off every single root and going, well, now it's back to a stump. You can take your time with it. You can put it as part of your plan, part of your development process for it. But it is one of the most important things that you need to get your head around. Repotting is great. Repotting is such a good thing to do for your trees. And if you're in the Northern Hemisphere and you're heading into your autumn, fall season, then I presume repotting isn't that far away for you. It's coming to a close for me. It's something that's on the radar for you down the track. This probably is a really timely one to build up your confidence that, knowing that doing nothing with these things, as always, and when I say nothing, it's not nothing now. It might be nothing in the future, nothing forever, because it should be part of your plan to say, okay, get the root ball strong enough, get the tree strong and healthy enough. Once that's strong enough, then look to to remove these things that, when they've got less of an impact on what the tree is. So those finer roots that do grow closer in towards the trunk are a bit of a nightmare, because every year I use sphagnum moss on top of the mix, and that sort of encourages those finer roots to start to grow. So I find that it's a continual problem for me to do it. But I generally have an idea where as that base Nebari starts to appear as I dig down the soil a little bit, next year or next time I repot it, I'll put it up a little bit higher. So therefore, the sphagnum moss isn't going to go right the way back to the trunk. It's only going to go around the periphery of the tree. So every repot, the tree gets slightly higher. I'm talking minimal. It might be 5-10 mil, something like that. It's very, very small amount where you're exposing a little bit more of that Nebari as it starts to join together and starts to spread down the trunk. That's when it really starts to come to its own fore. But Nebari work is super critical. You've got to have a super strong tree for it, and you've got to be super confident in how you're doing it. Sooner or later with your bonsai, something's going to get too thick. Something's going to get too long, something's going to need to be cut back, be it, part of the trunk that you want to change, be it part of a branch removal process, be it raw stock that you've bought. Where I've come across it recently was with repotting, and I'll give you a bit of background on this. I repotted a really large, my favourite tree, a radiata or Monterey pine. You would have, if you follow anything on any of the social media, you would have seen the other day that I removed it from its pot after a 3-year period, and the Nebari had spread so wide on this thing that it had started to bulge and grow over the edge of the pot. It had actually physically embedded itself into the pot. A comment was made that, they were surprised that the pot wasn't broken to get it out. Well, yeah, quite honestly, so was I. And I'm surprised that the Nebari hadn't put that much pressure onto this pot that it actually snapped it. If there's any weak point in this pot, this tree would have found it. And it's only a 3-year period. And that's what can happen, because normally when I repot, I always try and make it that I've got, a good couple of centimetres, 2-3 centimetres at least edge to edge around the pot when I put the tree back in there, to give those roots adequate distance to grow. It has to work that way, because without those new roots, or with an area being too tight against a pot, you'll find that the roots won't grow in that area, and it's just a complete waste. Like, you'll just have a dead spot in the root ball. So this thing, within 3 years, had grown out so wide, it not only hit the edge of the pot, but it had enough time to swell up over it and bulge. And in one way, I gave myself a 10 out of 10, a gold star on that report for that tree, because it's obviously happy, it's healthy, it's growing really well, foliage looks great. I'm doing a finger count down here as all these different things, come into my mind about why that tree's grown so well. There's no sacrifice branches on it, it's all fine ramification. So to get the base to swell like that, fertilizing's been good, watering's been good, everything's good, everything's great. Like, everything's going really, really well with the tree. But getting it out was a bloody nightmare, to be honest, because I went around with the sickle, as I normally do, dulling it on all the pumice and the scoria that's in the mix that the tree loved. Start getting around to the points where it's super tight, and thinking, God, how am I going to get this thing out? Like, it is touching, and not just at the very lip of the pot, it goes right the way down. Like, roots have hit the inside there and started to wrap around as well. So I cleared out as much space as I possibly could, probably a bit more than what I normally would, to be honest, because I was thinking I'm going to have to get something in there to free this tree. Tried to tilt the tree back, wedge the pot off the Nebari. No movement, none, no give whatsoever in this thing. It was jammed in there dead tight. And it did go through my mind at one point that I was going to have to get the hammer out and smash the pot, because I've had to do that before with training pots, terracotta training pots, where the tree just embeds itself in there over a period of time and you cannot get it out. So I was thinking, what other pots do I have that I can put this tree into? Tick that box first, then thought, okay, worst case scenario, we break the pot. Best case, I cut this thing out. I'm going to have to make some serious cuts on this thing. So I had to get the reciprocating saw out and start working my way around the edge of the pot and started to cut it, which was great. I got to cut through a lot of the roots. Took 2 blades after hitting all the pumice in there. That seems to take the edge off a relatively cheap reciprocating saw blade within minutes, to be honest, and it's a bit of a nightmare. But I had to keep a bit of a gap between the edge of the pot, obviously, because I didn't want to hit it with this machine because the vibration would smash the pot or chip it at worst. And I had to cut through these roots. Get through the roots, that's fine, but they're still wedged together. There's no way I could separate those two. Even though I'd made a cut that's, a couple of mil thick, I still couldn't get the tree to flex, couldn't get it to move at all in the pot. So I had to use the chisel, get in there with a chisel. And I've never done that before. Hitting roots or clearing roots out of the way with a chisel was definitely a new experience for me, and one that I had to be very careful with, but it worked. It seemed to work. So the tree then comes out of the pot, and this is the section of the podcast I want to talk about, not the removal or repotting of this radiata. I wanted to talk about when you're making large cuts, because it got my mind ticking over, thinking, all right, so now I've got to be really careful with these roots, because what I look for when I do these cutbacks is this branching or subroots on the way back. I didn't have the ability to see when I had to cut this thing out of the pot. So some of these significant roots had to get removed or reduced anyway. They're part of the Nebari, so I had to angle the cuts on the roots as they were coming out just to give it a nicer feel. But I wanted to cut it back to a point where I had some roots coming off the bottom of it, so that root wouldn't die all the way back or wouldn't be forced to start again. And luckily it did. So when it comes to major branch removal or major root removal or making a large cut, one thing that you've got to be very, very careful of is, because normally you'll use, let's say the first option is to use a saw, a hand saw. Second thing that you'll use, depending on the size of the branch, will be a large branch cutter. Then you'll go to a medium branch cutter, and then go to a fine branch cutter. You work your way down the list. When you make the cuts, you've got to be very careful. The thicker the branch is, the thicker the root is, and the bigger the cut that you've got to make, you'll get what I call chipping in. So those branch cutters, whatever style or size you're using, the more pressure you're putting on to make that cut, you've got to be careful you don't break the cutters, because there's a bloody good chance that you will. You'll either bend the handles or you'll bend the tips or you'll break something off, because they're not designed to cut overly large things. But if you are cutting something and you're feeling resistance as you're cutting, one technique I use is to pulse the cut. So rather than just constantly squeezing my hand, I'll squeeze, let go, squeeze, let go. And so it slowly starts to work its way in. But what happens is, as those blades come together, you get chipping in. And chipping in will go deeper than where you started the cut. So it'll create like a V type scenario on that branch or that root that you're cutting off. And you've got to be very careful that you don't cut in too far. And I've seen it with a lot of species where they're delicate, especially when they've got fluid flowing through them. Let's say, for instance, a maple of some kind. As you cut that large branch, the wood inside gets very, very brittle, very firm. And as you cut, you'll find it'll disintegrate. It'll start to chip away and break pieces. So you'll cut in, but you'll also break apart the cut. The idea with these things is that you want to do small cuts, small controlled measured cuts, which is where my preference would be to use a saw, because a fine-tooth saw that is, for bonsai, will make a very smooth, clean cut, and then you can go around the outside with a lighter branch cutter and just chip away lightly at that edge, and just make sure that you're doing very small cuts. Small cuts are far better than one large cut. One large cut will do damage to the area, so if you are going to do it, make sure that you're doing it a distance away from where you want that cut to finish. You'll be surprised. The bigger the branch, the bigger the root, the bigger the branch cutters, the more severe that chipping in is going to be, the more damage you're going to do. Just make sure that you do it further out than where you want to finish. And once you've made the cut and you've neatened it up as much as possible, depending if it's really large, use a really sharp blade like a retractable box cutter or something like that, or a Stanley knife, whatever term you use from wherever you are. Just use a really sharp blade and neaten those edges. The neater you can make the cambium, the bark area where you're making that cut, the easier it's going to heal. The rougher it is, the more the tree is going to put into repairing as opposed to healing over. Okay, so try and make it that as neat as you possibly can. And the last thing you've got to do, doesn't matter whether it's a root that you're cutting or it's a branch, is wound management. There's other podcasts that talk about wound management you can have a hunt for, but you've got to make sure that you're protecting that cut. And you'll notice that on the radiata, if you zoom in, I don't think on one of the photos I've done some of the root section, but I use cut putty. So I use cut putty on my pines and junipers where the sap is a bit thicker, and cedars, and I'll use cut paste on my deciduous varieties where the sap's a little bit lighter and it can seal better. But it's really important that you get that wound management in there as well. You don't want to leave an open cut, especially under the soil level. You don't want to leave open massive cuts where you can get things that bore into the wood or the wood rots or something like that. You want to heal over as quickly as you possibly can. But the main thing I want to make you aware of is that chipping in. When you're doing a large removal of something, just make sure your cutters are back a bit further than where you want the cut to finish. Watering your bonsais and how you do it, it's applying water to your trees is critical for your success and the survival of your trees too. So when it comes to watering, you've got to keep in mind, and I use this approach for everything that I do, and I suggest you do it as well. There's the best. There's what we can do as the absolute pinnacle of how we do something, and then there's a sliding scale working your way down to where you can do it to the best of your abilities. And that's the key that I want to talk about, is what's best for you and for your bonsai. There has to be, you can't quit your job or you can't quit your family just to be there to water your bonsai when you need to water them. Some people are very lucky and they make a life out of bonsai, like I have, and I can be there most times, but not all times. Like I've got travel coming up. I'm heading up to Northern Australia, to Cairns and to Brisbane, and then I'm going across to Perth. And there's a lot of time that I'm going to be travelling to do bonsai, to be with people to do bonsai, which excites me to the core. I love it, absolutely love it. And if I couldn't water my bonsai during that period, or find someone to water my bonsai during that period, or trust someone to water my bonsai during that period, I wouldn't be able to do it. And that's not what I want to do. I want to be able to share Bonsai Love. I want to be able to share my enthusiasm and build up people's bonsai and their skill set so they can make brilliant bonsai, the best bonsai in the world. That's what I see as my purpose. So I don't want to look at my bonsai and go, well, hang on, you're actually stopping me from doing what I want to do. You know what? I'm going to get rid of you. Or, you can get stuffed, because you don't want bonsai to become one of those things that you look at and you go, you know what, you're actually stopping me from going away at the hottest time of the year when it's 40 degrees, when I should be with my mates camping beside a river having, a couple of beers and soaking my feet in the water, or, having a surf or whatever it is. You don't want your bonsai to be put into that position. And that's on you. It's not on your trees. Your trees have the needs and wants that they have, and that will never change. You just need to factor in, how do I look after them and make sure that they get exactly what they need while I get what I need? You've got to have that symbiotic relationship between you and your bonsai, where you don't look at them and say, well, you know what, I can never have another holiday ever again because I've got these little trees in pots. I love the trees in pots. But, is that fair for your nearest and dearest? Is it fair on you? I don't think it is. I think we're built to travel. We're built to see things. We're built to experience things. We're built to connect and have community and enjoy and love life. And bonsai should be part of that. That makes it that little bit better by having them. Not make it a little bit worse because we're stuck or we're hindered and we can't do what we want to do because we're trapped. And it brings me in nicely to talk about automated watering systems. I use an automated watering system. I'm not going to go over the details. I promise I'm not going to bore you with it as I have for many years gone past. But I love it. And I don't think that I could have bonsai and live my life and have the relationships that I do in my life without having that automated watering system. On my list of what's best for my bonsai, hand watering every day of the week. Absolutely. No doubt about it. I would prefer to, especially this time of the year, like we're coming into the growing period. Trees are waking up at different times. Trees have different needs. To just walk out there and go, all right, automated system run, soak everything. It's like, hang on, that tree doesn't need it. But that tree there, it does need it, but it might need it again this afternoon because it's really at a rapid growing rate. And by not giving it what it needs when it needs it, you're not doing the best thing by the tree. And you're not going to get the best result. But remember that sliding scale I talked about. What's best for you in your life? Like if it's best to water your bonsai at 12:32 p.m. on a Wednesday, if you look at your diary and go, hang on, 12:32 on a Wednesday, I'm at work. I'm being paid. I'm actually I'm generating an income so I can pay the water bill and support repotting and fertilizing and feeding my trees. You don't have the choice at 12:32 on a Wednesday to give up whatever it is you're doing. Sometimes people do, sometimes people don't. But you need to think about it and go, well, okay, how do I give the tree what it needs? It might not be the ultimate, it might not be the best thing on the sliding scale, but having a system that you can rely on adequately that will allow you to go at 12:32 next Wednesday when the trees need watering, run system. For however long it is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever however long it is, will it be, perfect? Will it give the tree exactly what it needs? Maybe not, but will it give it 80%? Is 80% better than 0%? Is 80% better than losing your source of income? 100% it is. It's a no-brainer for me that you need to have something in place. And anyone that knows me, or anyone that's listened to more than about 10 seconds of this podcast, I'm very big on planning. I'm very big on being prepared. And I do have times where I'll sit and think, and I'll have so much going through my head that I'm trying to cover all bases and think of worst case scenarios. And that's just not just with bonsai. It's not just with watering systems. It's with everything. I recently in my camper van built drawers to go in. And I was thinking about how they're going to get installed and what sort of system. Is it a soft close? Is it a click close? What's best? How am I going to secure the tubs that go on top? And, a million things go through my head before I pick up the first pencil and start planning these things out. Same as my watering system. Every year, I've run this system forever. It feels like forever anyway. But I've run it forever, and yet every year I'm looking for weak points. Listen to last year. I'll go through on the podcast. I'll go through and plan for weaknesses. It's still happening now. Like I am just getting to the end of winter, and I'm upgrading my watering system already. That's how much I put into it, and I think about it. So when it comes to running an automating watering system, it's not just a matter of heading down to your hardware store, picking up whatever's on the shelf, and throwing it on the tap and going, "Yeah, done. I'm set, ready to go." That's not how they work. You've got to plan your water output, your water flow rates. Am I wetting all areas of the pot? I recently repotted a tree, put it into a bigger pot. And while it's no need, I don't have any need right now to run the automated watering system. Very soon I will, because I won't be in the state. I won't be around. So then I have to start planning and saying, okay, the old pot that I had that was smaller, the watering system that I had worked beautifully. It covered it. The tree had been in that pot for 3 or 4 years. And no issues. It had grown really well. There was no dry spots when it came to the watering system that I was using, the heads that I was using on the watering system. Went to a bigger pot, put those same ones on there, and I thought, I woke up one night and I thought, actually, I've probably got to check that that's going to work right. I don't need to. It's raining outside. It's nice and cold. Tree's not really growing. It's just gone back out on the bench. It's starting to take up water, but there's plenty of water supply there. You're hand watering, everything's okay. And I thought, hang on, I better just check that it's going to work all right. Ran it, and lucky I did, because now the pot is another 20% larger than what the previous pot was because of the size of the tree. There's effectively, for want of mathematics, there was 20% not being watered inside that pot. And if I just left it as is, yeah, sure, there's enough water getting in there for the tree to survive. Is it the ultimate? Is it the best for the tree? Could I do it better? Bloody oath, I could do it better. So I did. I fixed it. I fixed the watering system, tested it, made sure it's watering okay, making sure that the whole periphery of the root ball is now being wet, that enough flow rate's getting in there because it is a bigger pot. I've got to make sure that I've got enough water getting into that part, into the pot entirely. It's deeper, it's wider, it's longer, it's everything. So there's more volume of water that I need there. So what I had previously wasn't going to work. And likewise, if you're shuffling trees around the yard to make them look better, that's a major consideration. Is the flow rate that was for the old pot accurate and working for the new pot? So there's definitely downside to using an automated watering system. It's excess. You'll run too much water, or you'll not run enough, or you'll give trees not what they need when they need it. But there's a massive upside, and it's called life. It's called living. It's called the ability to get out and do things. And that might not be going away overseas for a 2-month period. It might be simply going up to the shops, or it could be, mowing the lawns, or it could be going to kids' sport. There's so much upside to it that having it as a backup, even if you are, you're home based, you're going to be here, you're never going to have a holiday. Just having it as a backup to say, well, you know what, I'm actually on a call for the next hour. I can't water my trees, but I know they're bone dry, or I've missed it this morning. Run the system, get a backup. But I know that there's some fear of watering systems. The fear of water systems comes from failure. From something going wrong. So building in that redundancy that I've talked about, again, that's not what this podcast is about, but getting the right system, setting up your system and doing the work on it at the start, testing, measuring, monitoring, making sure it's okay before you need to rely on it is the ultimate. Don't just put it in, don't test it, go away for a month and then come back and find all your trees dead because the system failed first use. You've got to make sure that you're using it. And anyway, I think watering systems for me are almost essential when it comes to having bonsai and having good bonsai and a number of bonsai, because the most unreliable thing you can find when it comes to watering your trees is someone other than yourself. And that doesn't matter whether it's family, it's friends, it's a garden expert, whatever it is. The next best thing to you watering your trees is an automated watering system that you can have control over. One of the things I do a lot is plan for this podcast. I really love the format. I love the connection. Maybe it's a bit too frequent. Maybe coming out every week is a bit too much. Sometimes from the messages I get, it's not enough. But I love the format that I can plan for. I can think about what I'm going to do, and we can talk about it. And there's future episodes I'm going to talk about species review, because I got asked recently about blue Atlantic cedars, so I'm going to talk about different species and how I look after them and things that I look out for, and try and make that part of the podcast in bits and pieces. Spring's here. Like, it's pinching season coming up. I looked at some of the maples that I've recently repotted that I need to pinch, and they've popped. So it's go time. One season finishes, the next one starts, which seems to be the way that it is in a busy bonsai yard, which is great. I love it. Not begrudging it. But I'm going to talk about different things like pruning of your prunus, which is for flowering, which is one of the things that I do. I sort of pride myself on trying to make sure that I can maximise whatever the tree is good at. How do I get it to that point? How do I make sure that I achieve that target for the tree? Whether and flowering for a lot of your trees is the pinnacle of what you want. And prunus for me, that flowering is the best part. Fruit's okay, but flowering is the best part. So I'm going to talk about how I prune my prunus before it gets to be that time for everybody, so you can maybe have a bit of a heads up. And also fertilising. Fertilising is a big one, which is about to start up. I want to talk about different fertilising strategies that I've got for different trees in different stages of development, different years after repotting, all that sort of stuff. So there's plenty more to come with the podcast. I do appreciate you listening in, as always. It's lovely. It's really nice. And I know I do say that every finish of the podcast, but it means a lot, and I like to make you feel like I know and I care, and I'm very grateful. So thank you very much. Until next time, happy bonsai.